I was not sorry that I had parted with it so readily, for I had no doubt that he would have had me killed if I had refused. One does not protest against the vagaries of a den of wild beasts, and my companions were lower than any beasts. While I devoured what Gunga Dass had provided, a coarse chapati and a cupful of the foul well water, the people showed not the faintest sign of curiosity, that curiosity which is so rampant as a rule in an Indian village. I could even fancy that they despised me. At all events, they treated me with the most chilling indifference, and Gunga Dass was nearly as bad. I plied him with questions about the terrible village, and received extremely unsatisfactory answers. So far as I could gather, it had been in existence from time immemorial, whence I concluded that it was at least a century old, and during that time no one had ever been known to escape from it. I had to control myself here with both hands, lest the blind terror should lay hold of me a second time and drive me raving round the crater. Gunga Dass took a malicious pleasure in emphasizing this point, and in watching me wince. Nothing that I could do would induce him to tell me who the mysterious "they" were. "It is so ordered," he would reply, "and I do not yet know anyone who has disobeyed the orders." "Only wait till my servants find that I am missing," I retorted, "and I promise you that this place will be cleared off the face of the earth. And I'll give you a lesson in civility, too, my friend." "Your servants would be torn in pieces before they came near this place, and besides, you are dead, my dear friend. It is not your fault, of course, but none the less you are dead and buried." At irregular intervals supplies of food, I was told, were dropped down from the land side into the amphitheater, and the inhabitants fought for them like wild beasts. When a man felt his death coming on, he retreated to his lair and died there. The body was sometimes dragged out of the hole and thrown onto the sand, or allowed to rot where it lay. The phrase "thrown onto the sand" caught my attention, and I asked Gunga Dass whether this sort of thing was not likely to breed a pestilence. "That," said he, with another of his wheezy chuckles, "you may see for yourself subsequently. You will have much time to make observations." Whereat, to his great delight, I winced once more, and hastily continued the conversation. "And how do you live here from day to day? What do you do?" The question elicited exactly the same answer as before, coupled with the information that this place is like your European heaven. There is neither marrying nor giving in marriage. Gunga Dass had been educated at the mission school, and, as he himself admitted, had he only changed his religion, like a wise man, might have avoided the living grave which was now his portion. But as long as I was with him, I fancy he was happy. Here was Sahib, a representative of the dominant race, helpless as a child, and completely at the mercy of his native neighbors. In a deliberate, lazy way, he set himself to torture me as a schoolboy would devote a rapturous half hour to watching the agonies of an impaled beetle, or as a ferret in a blind burrow might glue himself comfortably to the neck of a rabbit. The burden of his conversation was that there was no escape, of no kind whatever, and that I should stay here till I died and was thrown onto the sand. If it were possible to forejudge the conversation of the damned on the advent of a new soul in their abode, I should say that they would speak as Gunga Dass did to me throughout that long afternoon. I was powerless to protest or answer, all my energies being devoted to a struggle against the inexplicable terror that threatened to overwhelm me again and again. I can compare the feeling to nothing except the struggles of a man against the overpowering nausea of the Channel passage. Only my agony was of the spirit, and infinitely more terrible. As the day wore on, the inhabitants began to appear in full strength to catch the rays of the afternoon sun, which were now sloping in at the mouth of the crater. They assembled in little knots, and talked among themselves, without even throwing a glance in my direction. About 4 o'clock, as far as I could judge, Gunga Dass rose and dived into his lair for a moment, emerging with a live crow in his hands. The wretched bird was in a most draggled and deplorable condition, but seemed to be in no way afraid of its master. Advancing cautiously to the river front, Gunga Dass stepped from tussock to tussock until he had reached a smooth patch of sand directly in the line of the boat's fire. The occupants of the boat took no notice. Here he stopped, and with a couple of dexterous turns of the wrist, pegged the bird on its back with outstretched wings. As was only natural, the crow began to shriek at once, and beat the air with its claws. In a few seconds the clamor had attracted the attention of a bevy of wild crows on a shoal a few hundred yards away, where they were discussing something that looked like a corpse. Half a dozen crows flew over at once to see what was going on, and also, as it proved, to attack the pinioned bird. Gunga Dass, who had lain down on a tussock, motioned to me to be quiet, though I fancy this was a needless precaution. In a moment, and before I could see how it happened, a wild crow, who had grappled with the shrieking and helpless bird, was entangled in the latter's claws, swiftly disengaged by Gunga Dass, and pegged down beside its companion in adversity. Curiosity, it seemed, overpowered the rest of the flock, and almost before Gunga Dass and I had time to withdraw to the tussock, two more captives were struggling in the upturned claws of the decoys. So the chase, if I can give it so dignified a name, continued until Gunga Dass had captured 7 crows. 5 of them he throttled at once, reserving 2 for further operations another day. I was a good deal impressed by this, to me, novel method of securing food, and complimented Gunga Dass on his skill. "It is nothing to do," said he. "Tomorrow you must do it for me. You are stronger than I am." This calm assumption of superiority upset me not a little, and I answered peremptorily, "Indeed, you old ruffian, what do you think I have given you money for?" "Very well," was the unmoved reply. "Perhaps not tomorrow, nor the day after, nor subsequently, but in the end, and for many years, you will catch crows and eat crows, and you will thank your European God that you have crows to catch and eat." I could have cheerfully strangled him for this, but I judged it best under the circumstances to smother my resentment. An hour later I was eating one of the crows, and, as Gunga Dass had said, thanking my God that I had a crow to eat. Never as long as I live shall I forget that evening meal. The whole population were squatting on the hard sand platform opposite their dens, huddled over tiny fires of refuse and dried rushes. Death, having once laid his hand upon these men and forborne to strike, seemed to stand aloof from them now, for most of our company were old men, bent and worn and twisted with years, and women aged to all appearance as the Fates themselves. They sat together in knots and talked, God knows what they found to discuss, in low, equable tones, curiously in contrast to the strident babble with which natives are accustomed to make a day hideous. Now and then an access of that sudden fury which had possessed me in the morning would lay hold on a man or woman, and with yells and imprecations the sufferer would attack the steep slope until, baffled and bleeding, he fell back on the platform, incapable of moving a limb. The others would never even raise their eyes when this happened, as men too well aware of the futility of their fellows' attempts, and wearied with their useless repetition. I saw 4 such outbursts in the course of the evening. Gunga Dass took an eminently businesslike view of my situation, and, while we were dining (I can afford to laugh at the recollection now, but it was painful enough at the time), propounded the terms on which he would consent to "do" for me. My 9 rupees 8 annas, he argued, at the rate of 3 annas a day, would provide me with food for 51 days, or about 7 weeks. That is to say, he would be willing to cater for me for that length of time. At the end of it I was to look after myself. For further consideration, viz., my boots, he would be willing to allow me to occupy the den next to his own, and would supply me with as much dried grass for bedding as he could spare. "Very well, Gunga Dass," I replied. "To the first terms I cheerfully agree, but as there is nothing on earth to prevent me from killing you as you sit here, and taking everything that you have" (I thought of the 2 invaluable crows at the time), "I flatly refuse to give you my boots, and shall take whatever den I please." The stroke was a bold one, and I was glad when I saw that it had succeeded. Gunga Dass changed his tone immediately, and disavowed all intention of asking for my boots. At the time it did not strike me at all strange that I, a civil engineer, a man of 13 years' standing in the service, and, I trust, an average Englishman, should thus calmly threaten murder and violence against the man who had, for a consideration it is true, taken me under his wing. I had left the world, it seemed, for centuries. I was as certain then as I am now of my own existence, that in the accursed settlement there was no law save that of the strongest, that the living dead men had thrown behind them every cannon of the world which had cast them out, and that I had to depend for my own life on my strength and vigilance alone. The crew of the ill fated Min